All right, guys, here we are talking about what's happening in the South Carolina Lowcountry real estate market. And one of the things we're going to focus on today is an inspection report that some buyers don't necessarily know is happening, but it's critical to the transaction. So let's get after it. All right, guys, here we are. Always great, by the way, always great to have you guys watching us. We're getting such great feedback on these videos and so grateful for that feedback and sometimes the suggestions on what people want to hear about. So thanks for your time and attention and interest. Guys, we're going to go through just quick March data. So here we are already through Q1 of 2026. The March data looks pretty good. So listings were actually down. That's a reverse of the trend that we saw pretty much through 2025, which was through the end of the year. There were about 10 or 11% more listings that were on the market. New listings on the market compared to 2024. So we're seeing a little bit of a downward trend in terms of new inventory coming on the market. Pendings are up through March. The number of pending sales, buyer and seller, come together, up about 14% from where we were of March of 2025. Closings are down about 2% from where we were this time last year. But again, with that pending trending going up, we expect that data point will go up. Days on market, big jump there. Days on market statistically has gone up about 100%. So now we're about 140 days on average days on market. All the average and median sales prices, both year to date and for the month of March, were all positive. Up again, so really glad to see that. Sales price, list price ratio, just now under 97%. That's that negotiability that sellers and buyers are finding in the deals. And the monthly housing supply actually was at about 5 months supply this time last year. Now it's about 4.4. We always talk about, Chris, that balanced market, 3 to 6 months, guys. I know you've been watching it. 3 to 6 months are right squarely in that balanced market, but also depends on where you look within the marketplace. All right, guys, so there's that. What's going on in the market. We've been in this series of just kind of breaking down components of the contractor sale the way we see it. We've talked about inspectors, we've talked about appraisers, we've talked about the seller disclosure. Now we want to talk about what is locally and commonly referred to as the CL-100, but technically is known as the South Carolina Wood Infestation Report. And, you know, a lot of people, this inspection report that happens in a typical residential contractor sale, most people are like, oh, let's get the home inspector. We've already talked about that 100 to 200 page report, all those pictures and all that kind of stuff. But this little guy that's a required component of most of those transactions is not a sexy inspection report at all. I mean, you were making that point when we were just getting started. It's 2 or 3 pages. It's got maybe a graph that's a part of that, etc. So it's a necessary part, but we want to talk about it because a lot of times people just don't even see or realize it's happening. So let's talk about what is, Chris, we'll call it the CL-100. Okay. And we do that because that's pretty much the form that these licensed termite and pest control inspectors are utilizing universally to come to a conclusion about what they found. What are they looking at, Chris? Like, what are those inspectors looking at?
Well, the CL-100 in our contract to sale is Section 5. So you could read it, look at a sample contract or whatnot. Sure. But basically, this is not the home inspector, as you mentioned. This is a licensed inspector that comes and looks just for wood rot, wood destroying organisms, fungi, but looking for items that are significant in nature, not just cosmetic, but a bad enough problem that is they're requiring or suggesting a repair or a fix or solution to it. And so that's what they're looking for specifically.
And sometimes, here's one of the kind of misnomers. Some people say, oh, that's the termite letter. And if you're watching maybe from a different market area, it's like, oh, that's the termite inspection. A lot of people think it's all just about termites. And the reason is because those guys can do a lot of damage. They can do a lot of damage, but that is not the totality of it. So they're looking at wood destroying fungi, which we call that as just good old natural South Carolina wood rot. They're looking at powder post beetles. They're looking for carpenter bees, carpenter ants, anything that that's infesting the wood in the structure that can cause damage.
Right. And the reason this is done, and it typically, doesn't have to be, but typically, and as it's written in the contract, this is something that the seller is obligated to provide to the buyer. And it needs to be timely. So it needs to be within 30 days of closing, and the results of the inspection need to be delivered to the purchaser's attorney no later than 14 days prior to closing. Yeah. So it can't be the last minute type of thing.
Let's break that down really quickly. That's interesting because basically the report's only good for 30 days. It has a 30-day expiration because the thought is within 30 days there could maybe be a new infestation or new damage, etc. But the 14-day mark is interesting because the reality is that, and we've been doing this a long time, it used to be that those CL-100 reports would get ordered 2 days before closing, and then the results would show up and there was work that needed to be done. It's like, we can't scramble. So the local market got smart and said, guys, we need at least 2 weeks to be able to assess and address what comes up.
Right. And if issues do come up on the CL-100, basically it is just, this report helps to ensure that a buyer's not inheriting a problem.
Yeah, sure.
And an agent and a buyer walk through a house, even sometimes a home inspector will walk through a house. They might not see some of these things that the CL-100 inspector is specifically looking at. So it's important to know that this has to be timely. They're looking for a specific thing. And then after, if something's found, what happens?
Right.
This is not just a checkbox on the pathway to closing.
Right.
This could derail a closing, and it has derailed a closing.
Sure.
So it's something to take seriously. But a seller, if something comes up on the CL-100, whether it be termites, whether it be significant wood rot that needs repair, something like that, they can either fix it. The contract is saying it's going to be delivered, they're going to be delivered a clean CL-100 prior to closing, so they can fix it. If that's not a case, if that's not possible, then maybe a credit could be issued, or escrow could be, if a lender allows for it.
Sure.
They could escrow if it's going to take longer to fix, but it needs to be addressed. Yeah. It needs to be addressed. It's not an afterthought.
The thing of it is that if you find an infestation or you find damage, basically the seller is compelled to either treat it and or repair it. And so the challenge is that sometimes, it can be significant. It can be a sort of a nasty surprise that comes up at the last minute because maybe an owner didn't realize that they had some kind of infestation, or didn't realize in the corner that there was a lot of wood rot, or that there had been a leak going on and they discovered it under the bathroom. And it's like, oh gosh, now we've got a challenge. That's where we sort of see these things happening. And there's a couple of kind of misconceptions that come with it. Like when we talk with sellers and say, well, just get ready because the CL-100 is going to be part of the process and it's going to need to get done prior to closing. They say, oh, no. We have an annual termite inspection. I just had one done last month, so I don't need to buy a new one. That's different. You might have a termite bond, you might have a termite warranty that comes with an annual inspection of your property, which is great. And it tends to lead to a higher level of confidence that there's not going to be a problem on the CL-100. But again, remember, the CL-100 isn't just looking at termites. Right. They're looking at anything else they can find that's damaging wood on the property.
And let me follow up with something that you mentioned. A lot of folks do have that annual inspection, and they do have the warranty or something like that with a company. It's good to utilize this. Whoever pays for it, whoever orders it, typically the seller, they can choose who the inspector is. And I like to see them utilizing someone that's familiar with the property, someone that originally treated the property, somebody that's been putting the bait stations out, because they've got records on it. And it's I think maybe fewer surprises.
Sure. Well, and they have accountability with it too. Like that's part of their responsibility. And I like that you say about being familiar with it, because they might know how to get under the crawl space or get that location, etc. So and the other thing on it is that sometimes we do find, you'd mentioned this about the home inspection, sometimes there is overlap. Sometimes the home inspector saw something and the CL-100 inspector is going to see the same thing too, right? And so we recognize, and sometimes we see that in repair negotiations where it's like, well, why not? We saw it on the home inspection, which usually comes prior to the CL-100, and we'll say, let's wait and see if that comes up on the CL-100 to see if it's a required repair or not.
Sure.
And part of that too, in terms of required, is that, you know, you mentioned this before, that sometimes there are cosmetic issues. You know, there's a little bit of fungi damage to some trim around a doorway or something like that. But if a contractor looks at that and says, guys, that's minor, that's cosmetic, it's not structural, then a lot of times there's forgiveness that says that's not a required repair.
Sure.
And certainly there wasn't anything to treat from that perspective.
That's right. And they're crawling around all over the place. I mean, the problem areas typically are a result of moisture. And so if there's moisture that comes in contact with the wood, it could be leaves and pine straw raked up against the siding of the house.
Yeah, sure.
That's a moisture problem. Poor ventilation coming through. It's just an open invitation for insects, bugs, fungi to get in there and start to take the wood apart. And a lot of times, if you're paying attention to your house, a lot of the things that start cosmetic, address them. Because even though they might just be cosmetic, what tends to happen with wood rot, it gets worse.
Yeah, you're right about that. And it could come up on windows and doors, enclosures of space, things around
that
courtyards.
Gets more expensive. Yeah.
And so it is part of that thing as a homeowner. I think it's great to have some level of termite protection, a warranty, an annual inspection at least, a bond, etc. Doing an annual walk around of your property, just like you mentioned, sometimes landscapers, all due respect, they're just blowing material back up against the house. That's holding moisture up against some wood, so that soil to wood contact is a risky area. Just checking your property is usually some of the best preventative medicine against an issue on these things.
It really is, and it's just helpful to know and understand what this inspection is, timelines that are associated with it, all of that, to know that up front so that you can plan for it and that you don't have a surprise at the last minute when everything else looks like it's going fine. It's just is real good preventative behavior.
And what is preventative too? As soon as we talked about this before, is sometimes sellers say, well, should I do a pre-sale home inspection just to kind of figure out? You know, we talked about that with the seller disclosure. Like, that's a very proactive step. There's nothing that would prevent someone from doing a pre-sale CL-100.
Yeah.
Call over there. It's a few $100s, and just try to get a really good sense of it, because it is oftentimes, if there is an issue, this surprise can be bigger than what we find on a home inspection report.
Yes, it can. And maybe the last point in concert with what you just said, if you do a pre-inspection, even a CL-100, and then use the same inspector to do the follow-up prior to closing. And then that's just a quick, and really no surprises there unless something really weird has happened or they just absolutely missed it the first time.
Or maybe they did find a few things, you got it squared away, and now they've got it. Now they get a clean one. We always love it when a clean CL-100 comes in. And by the way, if you've been part of a transaction and you never really saw anything about the CL-100, it's almost always because it was perfectly clean. It was a non-issue, and there we went. So guys, there we are, a little bit of detailed information on the CL-100, the Wood Infestation Report. And guys, we look forward to our next video and your time together.